Okay, so this happened when I was babysitting two kids just a few months ago, and I knew I had to share this with you. I'm in my mid-20s and have been babysitting since I was probably around 16, between my own sibling and other family members' kids. I started getting my own regular kids that I would watch too, so that pretty much took up a lot of my time, especially in the summer, but I didn't mind. Their parents typically paid well, especially the ones that had multiple kids. So one of my regulars recommended me to their coworker, and I started watching their kids too. They had a 2-year-old girl named Macy and a 6-year-old boy named Josh. Macy was still just a baby, so when I did watch her, she was typically sleeping. If they were gone for longer periods of time, they offered to take her with them, but she was actually a pretty happy baby compared to others I've watched, so I didn't mind watching her. Josh was a good kid too. He was your average kid. He played with cars, Legos, and dinosaurs. His favorite food was macaroni and cheese, and he hated bedtime, but always crashed immediately. So when their parents had a corporate dinner party, they asked me to watch them, and I agreed, knowing I wouldn't have any problems. So I got there around 5 p.m. and saw the parents off for the night. I wanted to explain their house a little bit since it will be relevant. From the front door was the living room. Straight back was the dining room, and to the left was a hall that led to the parents' room, where Macy was still sleeping at the time. Josh's bedroom and a bathroom were also down that hall. Behind the dining room was a kitchen, the back door in another hall that led to their back room/office, and the stairs to the basement. The basement had been turned into a huge play area for Josh. All the big setups were down there, like the play workbench, things like that. There was even a small play set with a slide and push around cars. I know if I was a kid, I would have a blast. So there's the setup of the house. When I went over there that night, I was handed Macy as she was still awake, and Josh had been in his room playing. I said hi to Josh and then went back to the living room with Macy. After some time, Macy fell asleep, so I brought her to her parents' room. Josh was still in his room playing, but he had started getting loud, and I didn't want him to wake her up, so I asked him to come play in the living room or downstairs. He had no qualms with playing downstairs, so off he went. They also had dinner already, so I was sitting in the dining room eating what I brought. I got carried away doing something on my phone, so I had been sitting there for a while, but then I heard laughing coming from the direction of one of the bedrooms. I was curious because I know I asked Josh to play downstairs, and I also never saw him walk by. I went to his room to see what he was doing, and he was nowhere in there. I checked in the closet, under his bed, under the blankets, and even in his toy chest, and he was nowhere to be found. I was a little worried that he may have been in the room with Macy, so I went into their room, and she was still fast asleep. I didn't want to snoop through the parents' stuff, so when I did a quick glance over the room and didn't see him, I closed the door and went and checked on his room one more time and still didn't see him. Then I heard a thump coming from downstairs where I thought he was, so I went down to check. There were some toys sprawled around like he had been down there playing, but I still didn't see him. From there, I called out for Josh, starting to get slightly worried that I hadn't found him. When I didn't get a response, I went back upstairs and checked the back door just in case, but it was still locked. Josh knew he wasn't allowed to go outside alone, and I don't think he would have been able to reach the deadbolt enough to even unlock it, so I didn't think he went outside. Just in case though, I went to the front door to check it too, and it was also locked. I turned around to an empty living room, and at that point, I wasn't worried about waking Macy up, and I hollered out for Josh again, this time with a bit more of a serious tone. When I heard another laugh coming from the rooms, I went back to his room and still it was empty. Now I was starting to panic. Josh wasn't the type to play little pranks like this, so I was confused and frustrated, like, how was I able to clearly hear his laugh in his room? I went back to the dining room to grab my phone, ready to call his parents to be honest, to ask if he hid anywhere to give me some kind of idea, but my phone was also gone. So after searching the dining room, I went to the living room and didn't find it. I thought maybe I took it with me, so I checked the basement and the rooms one more time. Nothing. At this point, I had entered the rooms 3 times and the basement twice, so my last option was their home phone. I know, this had to be the only family I've worked for that still had one. They joked about it because it was cheaper for them to get the phone with cable than cable alone. It was hanging in the dining room over by the closet, so I walked over to it, called my phone, and I started hearing my ringtone nearby. I turn around to see Josh sitting at the table holding my phone. While I was relieved to see both the kid and my phone, I was also confused as to where he'd been. From the position of the phone, I would have been able to see him come out of the bedroom hallway or the kitchen. I would have heard him pull out the chair and sit on it, but yet I saw and heard nothing. I tried approaching it in a friendly way and asked him where he had been, and he just started laughing and handed me my phone. I tried being more exact and asked him if he was in the bedroom or his parents' room, and he shook his head no. I asked him if he was in the basement. He said no, and the same with the living room. He just said no and laughed. I just let it go because I didn't want to shake up this poor kid, but I did ask him to watch some TV with me in the living room. That way I could keep an eye on this little Houdini. From then on, when I watched them, I didn't have another disappearing act, but if I didn't have a hold on my phone, it would just disappear, and I would either find it somewhere I wouldn't have left it, or Josh would find it. And I know it may be asked, but no, Josh wasn't taking my phone. Again, he didn't do that. And when I mean I have a hold of it, I mean physically in my hand. If the last place I had it was in my pocket, it would end up somewhere else. If I left it in my purse or even my car, I would find it elsewhere. I don't know if this kid or my phone was able to break the matrix or what, but it's never been a dull moment since then when I have to watch them. If anything else significant happens, I'll be sure to update you. I have a super weird story from when I was a teenager and used to babysit this kid named Devin. This was back in the 80s, so some of the details may escape me, but I can remember the majority of what happened during the summer that I had to watch him pretty clearly. Some people out there may say it was nothing creepy or that it wasn't a big deal, but to me it was terrifying and is something that I still cannot explain, nor do I know if there really is an explanation other than it was a weird thing that happened. Devin was an only child, and he was the son of my mother's coworkers, the coworker that my mother used to carpool with actually, which made things convenient. When summer came around, she asked if I wanted to watch him for the months that he was off school, and it was in their house during the days, so I was all for it. Plus, she was going to pay me $50 a week, so that was a huge bonus for me, being 15 and all. I had met Devin once or twice, and what I knew about him was mostly positive. He seemed like a good kid when we had met, and I had no reservations against it at all. He was about 6 at the time, so he was definitely self-sufficient at some things, but still needed help with other things, and obviously couldn't be left alone. Honestly, It wasn't even that big of a deal when I went to watch him, and the first week went great. It was the second week where things started getting weird. My mom dropped me off at the house, and I went in and Devin was actually still asleep, which was a bit off. His mother told me that he had been up late and to just go ahead and let him sleep. After about 2 hours, he finally got up and came down the stairs, and he stopped at the base of the stairs and just kind of stared at me. I asked him what was up and if he was okay, and he just stood there wobbling and staring. It was kind of like he was still asleep while he was standing there, but I don't think he was sleepwalking. After a few minutes, he looked straight at me and said, "I'm sorry." I wasn't sure what he meant, so I asked him what he was sorry for. He kept staring and then walked away to the kitchen and got his breakfast. I wasn't sure what exactly he was going on about or what he meant by it, so I just let it go. And that's when things got weird. That night, I had the weirdest nightmare. In the dream, I was at the house watching Devin, except he wasn't acting like himself. He was sitting on the couch and rocking back and forth, mumbling about how things were wrong. In the dream, I asked him if he was okay, like I did that morning, and he attacked me, like he jumped on me and started scratching at my face. I woke up in a cold sweat after that, just kind of panicking, like, what the hell kind of nightmare was that? It would have been fine if that was a one-time thing, but I had this nightmare numerous times after that night. Watching Devin was always fine. He never did anything weird in real life, but then every single night I would have one of these terrible nightmares where Devin would be this horrifying being. He would attack me, scratch me, choke me. In some of the dreams, he would actually try to murder me. He would swing at me with a knife, try to stab me, or choke me out. It got to the point where I was hardly sleeping because of how scared I was of having these dreams, and I was actually almost scared to even see Devin. He was such a sweet and loving kid in real life, but the nightmares were getting to the point that they were affecting how I was seeing him. I would be sitting on the couch and he would get up to get something, and the second he moved, I would jump. Like I was actually scared of him running at me and attacking me. I had these nightmares every night the entire time I watched him, and it really messed with my mental health. What made it even weirder was that the day that school started back up and I was done babysitting him, the nightmare stopped happening abruptly. I was horrified that I was going to keep having these dreams on school nights and was going to struggle with sleeping because of it, but it just didn't happen. I have no idea why I had these haunting dreams the whole time I watched him. I have no idea what prompted my brain to create this really weird scenario, but they didn't start until that day when he came down and told me he was sorry. It was almost as if he was apologizing to me for causing the dreams in advance. Some people will likely say that I was having dreams about him because I was seeing him every day, and that makes sense, but what doesn't make sense is the fact that they were such terrifying nightmares and that they started on that specific day. Nor does it make sense to me that I had the same type of nightmare every single night, and then for them to just stop happening when I was done watching him. I don't know if people will see this as something paranormal or weird, or if they'll just say it was a dumb coincidence. But to me, it was scary, and I thought it would be neat to share. My mother has always been such a giving person. My parents tried to have kids, and after years of no luck, they went to the doctor to learn that, due to medical issues, she would probably never conceive. So instead, they adopted me at the age of 2 and fostered many children in between. This also led my mother to start her own daycare, so she could be helpful to others in need, as well as be around as many children as she wanted. She was also so kind and supportive to everyone and all the kids that we watched, and it was no wonder everyone liked her. She ran the daycare out of our home for most of the time that I lived there too, which meant I also helped a lot, but I didn't mind. It was like having little brothers and sisters any time to play with. My dad even built another large room to the back of our house as the main play area for the daycare. He even built a new door to the back with a covered porch that led to the yard with all the outdoor toys and games. The daycare was doing great, and since I grew up around so many kids, I found no reason to stop helping out, and in fact, I started officially working there with my mom. That's where this story took place. At this point, I was 23 and had been working there full time for a few years now while I went to school for children's psychology. I ran errands for my mom, like picking up groceries, and I helped with scheduling and making meals and snacks for the kids. We also planned special activities for the kids at least once a week. It was close to Mother's Day, so we had picked up some extra supplies for the kids to make gifts for their moms. We had materials to make cards, treat bags, and even paper flower bouquets. I loved walking around and helping them out, so we got them all in spots with like 4 or 5 kids at each table to split them up a bit. Now for the kids. We had about 16 kids there that day because I remember having one table empty, so we just put all the supplies on it. We had quite a few regulars, but would have newcomers join every so often, which is when I met Blake. Blake was about 7, I believe. He could fully talk and hold normal conversations with you. He loved sharks and could tell you just about anything about any shark you named. I will add, though, that he had a cochlear implant in his left ear, as it will be relevant later, but you would never expect that he had hearing difficulties, as this boy could hear me from across the loud room. Blake had been coming to our daycare for about a month or so I was still trying to get to know him at the time. I sat at the table he was at and asked him and the other kids what they wanted to make, and they all wanted to start with a card. I laid out the markers, glue, stickers, and scissors, and let them get started as I asked them about themselves and things their mom liked to help give ideas on what to make. Blake said his mom loved tulips, but didn't know how to draw them, so I showed him an easy way to do it. He said he wanted to buy real tulips for her because she was the best mom he ever had. At the time, it sounded like a weird statement, but there could have been many reasons for having multiple mothers, right? So I didn't dwell on it. Then one of the other kids wanted to cut their card out in the shape of a heart, so I agreed and passed her the scissors. I noticed Blake staring at one of the other kids using the scissors, so I asked him if he wanted to cut out his card too, and he said yes. So once the other one was done, I went to hand him the scissors and he reluctantly grabbed them and just stared at them. I started to ask what was wrong when he dropped them on the table in front of me and asked me to do it. I tried assuring him that he could do it because they were safety scissors and he was given permission to use them because an adult was around, but I thanked him for being considerate and safe. He seemed a bit uncomfortable with the scissors near him, kind of like a kid would act when they saw an animal or something they were afraid of. So I asked him if there was something wrong, and he explained further. He said he didn't like scissors because that was how he lost his ear. I was confused at first because, of course, he had both ears, but I knew about his implant, so really he just lost his hearing, or never had it really. So I tried explaining that he had both his ears and asked if he was referring to not being able to hear out of it. He confirmed this by nodding and continued to tell me something a bit more disturbing. I may not remember the exact phrasing, but this is what he told me. In my old life, I hurt a lot of girls. I made them cry and I made them bleed. But one girl got away because I didn't tie the string right. I'm not good at tying my shoes either. But I tried to catch her and she grabbed some scissors and pushed them into my ear. It hurt really bad and made me bleed and I couldn't hear anymore. Then she put the scissors in my heart and I died. So I just sat there in shock of what I just heard. And he must have seen the terror in my face because then he followed it up with something like this. But it's okay, I don't want to hurt anyone now. I talked to God and he gave me another chance, but I lost my ear for good because of how bad I was. I'm a lot nicer now. And then he continued to stare at me and wait for me to cut out his card. After I looked at the other kids and noticed that they had paid no attention to his story and were still focused on their own projects, I just shook it off and cut it out. I just watched him from there as he carefully picked the colors for his card and talked about his mom. He was his normal self. He never brought that up again in anything related to it. I had never heard him talk about anything so gruesome, so it really caught me off guard. Later on that day, I had a moment and I talked to my mom about it. She thought it was pretty alarming too, so she agreed to ask Blake's parents about it, thinking maybe he watched or saw something he shouldn't have. They said they had never heard anything like that, and said they also don't allow him to watch anything violent, so even they had no clue where he could have gotten that from. They were surprised by what he said because they never said anything to him, but did admit that when speaking about his implant before, he would claim that they were wrong as to why he had to wear them, but never clarified or explained anything further. I don't know why I was the chosen one to hear that story, but it was truly creepy, hearing it from a little kid like Blake. I've been trying to find some kind of story on a kidnapper or killer that was stabbed in the ear, but no luck yet. But at the same time, I'm kind of scared to find something. Also, he never mentioned anything since that day about his past life, and I'm not sure if I want him to or not. This was actually about a kid I used to babysit. He had a wild imagination. Between all these made-up games he played, stories he would tell me and the likes, so at first it was hard to take this seriously. One time I was watching him in the evening, so I was making popcorn for us. They had a gas stove, so it was always a trick to get it to light. While I was starting it, he came running in the kitchen, so I told him to slow down and watch out so he didn't catch his hair on fire. He responded with, "Oh, I know, fire hurts. I died in one." And he just had these huge eyes as he told me. I just kind of snickered, thinking he just said something incorrectly. It said something like, "Then you know you shouldn't be close to the stove." So he smiled and walked away. Weird. A few days later, I was over there again and we were watching some kids show. I don't remember what it was called, but they always did some kind of simple learning or science thing, and they would always go through a safety part like, don't run with scissors, always use a crosswalk and look both ways, things like that. This time it was about how to escape from a fire and stop, drop, and roll. They showed if you were in a building, to keep low and put a damp towel on your head if possible, and crawl to the exit. This boy pops up and says, "Sometimes you can't." I just said, "What do you mean?" "We didn't have towels downstairs and it's hard to crawl upstairs." Once I finally figured out what to say, I asked him if his old house caught on fire, though I didn't recall his parents ever mentioning one. So he explained more. He said his old house did, but he couldn't get out. What are you supposed to say to that? I just asked, "Did someone have to save you then?" He looked annoyed like I wasn't understanding, and I wasn't, and said, "No, I died," and just stared at me. I just said okay and left it at that. I asked his parents that evening about a house fire, and they said they've never been in one, and he certainly hadn't. I told him what he had said, and they thought it was weird too, but assumed it was just something he watched, so I let it go, even though I still thought it was odd. They ended up going on vacation, so I didn't babysit for 2 weeks, but when I came back, he was right back at it. We were playing something like superheroes, and I ended up being killed by the bad guy. As I laid on the ground, he came up to me and rubbed my face and whispered, "Be alive again." So I got up and pretended to be a zombie, and he told me, "No, you get a real life again like me." I thought you were playing still, so I mentioned that he hadn't died yet. He then tried to explain to me again that he got a new real life after the fire. I know it's useless arguing with a child, but I said, "Your mom and dad told me you guys didn't have a fire though." That's when he must have gotten tired of repeating himself, so he explained it as he walked back and forth. He said it was his old self in his old home with his old mom and dad and big brother. He said he was in the basement in his brother's room where he fell asleep, and he woke up feeling hot, and the last thing he remembered was yelling for his brother and the stairs being too hot to climb. This whole time that he's telling me this, he doesn't seem sad, but more so relieved, especially as he said, "But it's okay, they were able to get out and they had a party for me." Not gonna lie, that freaked me out. But just to check, I asked him, "So did this happen to you, or did you see this in a movie?" He got mad at me, like I didn't believe him. So I had to apologize and told him that I was happy that he was okay now. I tried asking if he remembered what his home or his family looked like, but he said all he remembered was the yellow house. This time I did not tell his parents. He seemed so matter-of-fact and detailed for such a young child, so I left it alone. But now I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in looking up house fires. Does anyone know how to tell someone who lost a child that they've moved on and they're happy again? So I have a cousin named Mary that I have always thought of as a bit odd. She's a good kid, don't get me wrong, but she's always had a bit of a weirdness about her. My mom says that she's most likely sensitive to the paranormal, and that may be true, but to me, some of the things she's sensitive to or has said have been really strange. It's probably important to mention that Mary is 7 now, but when she started to say weird things, she was, I believe, around 4. The first thing I remember her saying that was weird was when I stayed the night over at my aunt and uncle's house. I was 13 at the time, and she was 4, like I mentioned. And when I stayed over, she wanted me to sleep in her room with her. I set up my sleeping bag in her room by her bed and was ready to go to sleep. After about 10 minutes or so, Mary put her hand on my shoulder and started talking, but it wasn't like she was talking to me. It sounded like she was talking to someone else in the room. I can actually remember exactly what she said too, because it scared the absolute hell out of me. The whole time she was sitting there talking, she was telling whatever she was talking to that I was nice. She said something like, "No, don't bother her. She's nice. I like her." Then after a few seconds, she seemed to get more serious and say, "No, you can't take her." And then she chuckled and went to sleep. She seriously said this, didn't say anything to me about it, laughed, and then passed out. It was creepy, but I moved on and pretty much forgot about it, assuming she was talking to her imaginary friend or whatever. That changed when my aunt sent me a text after I spent the night, and asked me if she had mentioned anything about being scared in her room. I said no, but then I told her that when I was in there, she was talking to herself. My aunt then goes on to tell me that my cousin told her that she didn't want to sleep in her room anymore because the man that lives in the walls keeps watching her. My aunt tried to get more information, but she kept saying that there was a man that would walk through the walls and watch her sleep, and it scared her, so she didn't want to sleep there anymore. She actually didn't sleep in her room for a few weeks after this, and anytime she went to her room, she would make angry comments to someone and then run out screaming. Not like scared screaming, but screaming like she was angry, almost growling. Then, after a few weeks, she kind of just moved on and went back to normal. This wasn't the only time that she had one of these events, but this was one of the ones I was present for, and it was kind of weird. It could have been an imaginary friend, sure, but it felt more real than that. She seemed way too involved for it to be imaginary. Like I mentioned, my mom says that she's sensitive to the paranormal, and I think I agree with that, but mostly because of this and a few other things. Hopefully you think this is creepy enough to include in a video, because to me it was seriously creepy. And that, my friends, was a collection of creepy kid stories. Those are always fascinating to me. I don't have any kids, but have several nieces and nephews that have thankfully only said funny things, those little kid jokes, but nothing creepy like that. I don't know how I would react if one of them told me they remembered a past life. There'd be a lot of questions. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, I hope you give that a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe and leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts. Do you have any stories similar like this? Anything that you've experienced? Or maybe anything funny? Doesn't have to be creepy. Sometimes they just say things that make you say, what? So, anyways, friends, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, take care.